On a stormy night in Lagos, a struggling young artist sat before her canvas, guided by a force she could not explain. Stroke by stroke, a face began to emerge. Eyes so alive, so piercing, they seemed to follow her across the room. She had never seen him before, yet her heart raced, as if destiny itself had whispered his image into her hands. By dawn, the painting was complete, and the very next day, that same face appeared on the news, belonging to a billionaire who had just returned to Nigeria after vanishing for 6 years. What happens when a woman paints a stranger into existence, only to find he is real, and his empire is about to collapse? This is not just a story of wealth and betrayal. It is a story of visions, forbidden love, and a destiny neither of them can escape. The rain came down hard that night in Lagos, hammering rooftops and streets until the city itself seemed to shiver. Inside a cramped studio apartment tucked between the bustling roads of Surulere, Nkemjika sat upright on her bed, her heart pounding. Sleep had abandoned her. Something stronger, something unexplainable, pulled her toward her easel. She did not know why, but she obeyed. The lights had gone out hours ago, another sudden blackout, so her small room glowed only with candlelight and the rhythmic flashes of lightning. Shadows stretched long against the walls, flickering with every movement. She pulled her canvas closer, dipped her brush into a mixture of colors, and began to paint. Her hand trembled, but it did not falter. It was as though she wasn't controlling it at all. Stroke after stroke, something strange took form. She painted not with thought, but with instinct, guided by an invisible current flowing through her veins. A face appeared slowly, each detail sharp and deliberate. The sharp cut of a jawline, lips pressed in quiet command, a brow that seemed to hold entire burdens. Then the eyes. The moment she painted the eyes, her chest tightened. They were not ordinary eyes. They were alive. They seemed to watch her, piercing through the candlelight, questioning her very existence. She dropped her brush, heart racing, and staggered back. Yet the canvas pulled her in, whispering silently, "Finish me." Her roommate, Adaze, stirred from the other side of the room. "Nkem, what are you doing? It's past midnight." "I don't know," Nkemjika whispered, barely recognizing her own voice. "I had to paint." Adaze rubbed her eyes and walked over, squinting at the half-finished portrait. "Chineke, who is this?" "I don't know him," Nkemjika replied. "I've never seen him before." Adaze frowned. "Then why does it feel like he's looking straight at me?" The words sent a chill through the air. The storm outside howled as if in agreement. A sudden gust blew the window open, scattering papers across the floor. Nkemjika slammed it shut. But when she turned back to the canvas, she froze. The painted eyes seemed brighter, alive. In the candlelight, following her, Adaze shivered and shook her head. "Burn it, Nkem. Some things are not ordinary. You should burn it now." "No," Nkemjika said firmly, though her own voice trembled. "I can't." "You're afraid of it, yet you want to keep it? That's madness." Nkemjika stepped closer to the painting, her own fear mingling with an inexplicable pull. She touched the edge of the canvas, fingertips trembling, and felt an energy pulse beneath the surface like a heartbeat. "I don't know why," she admitted, "but this painting feels like it belongs to me." Hours passed. The storm eased, leaving behind the distant hum of Lagos traffic slowly returning to life. As dawn broke, sunlight poured through the cracked curtains, illuminating the canvas. The man's face glowed in the morning light, his eyes burning with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. Adaze had gone back to sleep, but Nkemjika couldn't. She sat in silence, staring at the man she had conjured out of nothing. She felt strangely connected to him, as though they shared an invisible thread tying their souls together. She whispered to the painted face, "Why do I feel like you're alive somewhere?" The room was silent, yet the question seemed to hang in the air like incense smoke, heavy and unyielding. That night, exhaustion finally overcame her. She lay on her bed, staring at the shadowed outline of the painting draped under a cloth. Sleep pulled her under slowly. And then, the news. The TV screen in the living room flickered as a daisy screamed her name. Nkemjika stumbled out, rubbing her eyes, and froze in the doorway. On the news, a sleek black SUV pulled up to Murtala Muhammad International Airport. Cameras flashed as a tall, imposing man stepped out. His face, sharp jawline, commanding lips, eyes filled with the weight of secrets, was exactly the same as the man in her painting. The broadcaster's voice filled the silence. After 6 years of absence from the public eye, Nigerian-born billionaire Obinna Obidike has returned. Known globally as the founder of Vastcart, Africa's largest e-commerce and fintech empire, Obidike's reappearance is set to reshape the economic landscape. Nkemjika's knees weakened. She grabbed the edge of the sofa for balance. Her heart thundered as her eyes darted between the TV and the painting hidden under the cloth in her room. They were the same, down to the eyes that burned through her. Adaiz clutched her arm. Nkem, that's him. That's the man you painted. Nkemjika's lips quivered, but no words came. Her life had just shifted, and deep inside, she knew this was no accident. Fate had reached into her small Lagos apartment and delivered her into the orbit of a man she should never have known. And as the newscaster continued, her voice low and dramatic, Nkemjika felt a chill run through her spine. Obinna Obidike has landed in Lagos, and the world wants to know why. He has returned. The man in Nkemjika's painting was no ghost, no phantom pulled from the winds of imagination. His name was Obinna Obidike, and his return to Nigeria sent ripples across the nation and far beyond. For 6 long years, his absence had been a mystery. He had vanished at the height of his fame, leaving behind only rumors and whispers. Some believed he had retreated into Europe, building new companies in the shadows. Others claimed he had fallen out with global investors, while a few whispered of something darker, an enemy powerful enough to push him into exile. Whatever the truth, Obinna's silence had been louder than words. Now, his sudden reappearance was not just news, it was a storm. Television screens across the country buzzed with images of him stepping out of a convoy at the Lagos airport. Obinna moved with a calm certainty, flanked by aides who shielded him from the flashes of journalists. He offered no words, only a controlled nod, and swept into the armored SUV waiting for him. The broadcaster's voice rose in excitement, listing his achievements. Founder of Vastcart, a global e-commerce giant that had redefined African trade. Architect of multiple fintech platforms that connected millions to digital wealth. Holder of a private fortune whispered to be in the billions of dollars. But it was not only his wealth that made him a legend. It was his enigma. The cameras zoomed in on his face, and Nkemjika felt her pulse quicken. There he was, the same jawline, the same piercing eyes she had painted only nights ago. The resemblance was flawless. She pressed a hand against her chest as though to hold her heart in place. This was not a coincidence. Daisy leaned closer, whispering, "You see it too, don't you? Kem, that's your painting come alive." Nkemjika's lips trembled. "Yes, it's him." The newscaster's voice deepened, adding fuel to the mystery. "Mr. Obidike has not granted a single interview since his return. He has refused all press inquiries and is said to have taken residence at the Skylux Towers in Eco-Atlantic. While his reappearance raises countless questions, one thing is certain. His presence will change the balance of power in both business and politics." Nkemjika could not tear her eyes away. The way the cameras struggled to capture him, like a lion moving among sheep. His aura radiated power, yet his eyes told another story. They were not merely sharp, they were burdened. Beneath the steel was a quiet sorrow, the loneliness of a man who had seen too much. The whispers began to spread almost instantly. Markets trembled at the possibility of his next move. Business rivals held emergency meetings, calculating what his return could mean. Politicians adjusted speeches overnight, aware that Obinna's shadow could tilt entire campaigns. On social media, Nigerians erupted in excitement and suspicion. The king is back. Where has he been hiding all these years? He's not back for business. He's back for revenge. Even abroad, the headlines spoke his name. The Financial Times speculated on a secret merger. Bloomberg Africa hinted at a hidden agenda. Yet the man himself remained silent, his face appearing only once before vanishing into the fortified penthouse high above Lagos. Nkemjika turned off the TV, her hands trembling. She walked slowly back into her studio, pulled the cloth off her painting, and stared. The resemblance was too exact, too impossible. Every brushstroke aligned with the man on the screen. She had painted him before he appeared. Her heart beat wildly. Was this fate? A curse? A gift? She remembered the way his painted eyes had followed her, demanding recognition. Now she understood why. Those were the eyes of a man alive, a man whose story was still being written. In the silence of her small studio, her thoughts grew darker. She wondered why she, out of millions, had been chosen to bear this vision. Had her art connected her to him, or was it a warning? Far across the city, inside the towering glass fortress of Skylux Towers, Obinna Obidike stood by the window of his penthouse suite. The skyline stretched endlessly before him, Victoria Island gleaming with its lights, the Atlantic waves crashing beyond. Yet his expression was far from victorious. He touched the edge of his cufflink absently, his face shadowed with an unreadable weight. He had returned, yes, but for reasons only he knew. Behind him, aides whispered, phones buzzed, plans unfolded. But Obinna remained silent, his gaze fixed far away, as though searching for something invisible. Back in Surulere, Nkemjika sat before her painting, whispering to herself as the weight of destiny pressed down. Why did I paint you before you appeared? The question hung in the air unanswered, but deep inside, she knew her life had just collided with a man whose story would not leave her untouched. As thunder rolled again across Lagos, Nkemjika pressed her palm to the painting, shivering at the thought. What if she hadn't painted him by chance, but because their lives were bound together in ways neither of them could yet understand? Victoria Island pulsed with elegance that evening. The gallery lights glowed against marble floors, soft jazz floated in the background, and glasses of champagne clinked between conversations. Lagos's elite had gathered, oil heirs draped in Italian suits, diplomats mingling with foreign investors, and socialites in gowns shimmering like liquid gold. Every wall carried pieces of art, but one painting would change everything. Nkemjika stood near the entrance, heart pounding. She had not wanted to bring the portrait, but her mentor had insisted. Your boldness is what will put you on the map, he'd said. Boldness? She felt only dread. The portrait hung at the far end of the hall, its eyes piercing the crowd the way they had pierced her. She avoided looking at it, afraid of what she might feel again. The murmurs around her grew louder as people clustered near the canvas. Some tilted their heads, analyzing strokes. Others whispered of its power. The room seemed drawn into its orbit, like moths toward a flame. And then the doors opened. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Heads turned, conversations hushed. Obinna Obidike had arrived. He wore a simple black suit, tailored to perfection, but it was not his clothes that commanded attention. It was his presence, calm, magnetic, intimidating. The air itself seemed to bend around him. Cameras clicked softly as the wealthy guests tried to act casual while stealing glances. Obinna rarely appeared at social gatherings, so his presence here was a thunderclap. Nkemjika's breath caught in her throat. She watched him stride into the gallery, his aides lingering discreetly behind. He moved with the composure of a man who belonged everywhere, yet trusted nowhere. And then it happened. His eyes fell on the painting. He stopped. The confident stride faltered. His expression hardened, the faintest flicker of shock crossing his face. For the first time that evening, the billionaire lost control. The guests noticed. Whispers ran like wildfire through the hall. Obinna walked toward the painting, each step deliberate, his gaze locked on the portrait as if nothing else existed. He stopped in front of it, silent, staring. His face grew pale. A diplomat leaned toward another guest and whispered, "Why does he look afraid?" The air grew thick with anticipation. Then Obinna spoke, his voice low but firm. "Who painted this?" The gallery hushed. Nkemjika froze. Every eye turned to her as though destiny had called her name aloud. Her mentor motioned toward her nervously. "She did," he said, pointing at the young woman half hidden by the crowd. Obinna's eyes snapped to her. Intense, sharp, searching. Nkemjika's legs trembled, but she forced herself forward. The crowd parted silently, watching with ravenous curiosity. When she finally stood before him, the billionaire towered over her, his presence suffocating. "You painted this?" he asked, his voice carrying both disbelief and accusation. Nkemjika swallowed hard. "Yes, from a vision." The word hung in the air like thunder. The guests exchanged startled glances. Some scoffed, others leaned in, desperate for more. Obinna's jaw tightened. His eyes searched hers for lies, but found only trembling honesty. "A vision," he repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of the word. His fingers twitched at his side, the only crack in his composure. Nkemjika felt her voice slip into a whisper. "I had never seen you before." The tension was electric, drawing the attention of everyone in the gallery. Wealthy socialites craned their necks. Investors whispered into their glasses. A Nigerian billionaire, undone by a painting, it was a scene no one could look away from. Obinna leaned closer, his tone sharp but quieter now, meant only for her. "We need to talk. Alone." Before she could respond, he turned and gestured to a staff member. Within minutes, they were escorted upstairs, away from the crowd's curious eyes. They entered a glass-walled office overlooking the glowing gallery below. From up there, the city's skyline flickered through the windows, tall towers piercing the night sky. Nkemjika's hands fidgeted nervously. The silence between them was thick, heavy, pressing down. Obinna turned, his face unreadable, though his eyes burned with questions. He took a step closer, every movement deliberate, like a man walking into a battlefield. Finally, his voice broke the silence, low and dangerous. "Who sent you?" The question hit her like a slap, sharp and unexpected. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Below them, the crowd buzzed like bees, oblivious to the storm brewing above. Her heart raced, her mind spun, but one thought consumed her. This was no ordinary encounter. Fate had crossed their paths, and it would not let them go easily. Obinna's gaze bored into her, unrelenting, as if the answer to his question could decide whether she was an ally, or the greatest threat he had ever faced. The glass-walled office above the gallery seemed to exist in another world. Below, the guests buzzed like restless insects, their laughter and music muffled by distance. But here, silence reigned, tense, heavy, suffocating. Obinna stood tall, his hands clasped behind his back, his figure outlined by the Lagos skyline. The city lights reflected against the glass, casting fractured patterns across his sharp features. He did not move. He only studied Nkemjika with eyes that pierced straight through her. "Who sent you?" His voice was calm, but beneath it lay the force of a storm. "No one," Nkemjika stammered, clutching her trembling hands together. "I don't even know you. I painted what I saw in my mind." "Your mind," he repeated slowly, his voice echoing faintly in the room. He turned, stepping closer, until the space between them shrank. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," she whispered. "The news. Obinna Obidike." He studied her face, searching for deceit. "Then you know I've been gone for 6 years. My image has not been seen anywhere. I made sure of it. No press, no appearances, no cameras. Even my board members don't have a recent photograph. Tell me, how could you paint me exactly, when no one else could?" Nkemjika's throat tightened. She shook her head. "I don't know. The night I painted, it felt like something was guiding me. I had no choice. The face just came." Obinna's jaw flexed, but his eyes softened, just slightly. Still, suspicion lingered. He circled the room slowly, like a lion testing the bars of its cage. "Let's test your story," he said finally, turning sharply toward her. "What else did you see?" Nkemjika swallowed. Her mind flashed with the strange visions that had come to her in fragments. A gleaming jet. cutting across a cloudy sky, and a heavy silver chain with a carved symbol pressed against a chest. She hesitated, unsure if speaking would condemn her. "I saw a jet," she murmured, "with your initials painted faintly near the wings. It was enormous, white with streaks of cobalt blue. And I saw—" Her eyes darted to his collarbone, where beneath his shirt something faintly pressed against the fabric. A necklace, thick, silver, with an engraved lion's head. It felt important to you. The air froze. Obinna's hand moved instinctively to his chest, fingers brushing the hidden chain beneath his shirt. His eyes widened, not in anger this time, but in shock. No one knew of that necklace. It was a family heirloom, handed to him by his mother before she died. He never wore it publicly. Not even his closest advisors had seen it. "How?" he whispered under his breath, more to himself than to her. Nkemjika shook her head desperately. "I don't know. I just saw it. The same way I saw your face." The walls of his distrust, tall and unshakable, trembled at the edges. He stepped back, his breath unsteady, as if the certainty that had anchored him all his life was slipping. For the first time in years, Obinna felt something foreign. Fear. He turned away, facing the glowing skyline again. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, his own face overlaid with the haunting thought of hers. If she had painted him before his arrival, if she had seen the private details of his life no one else knew, then what did that mean? Was she a threat, a messenger, or something far stranger? The silence stretched until it was unbearable. Finally he spoke again, his voice lower, quieter. "If you painted me before I came, then you may be tied to what's coming. And what's coming." He trailed off, unfinished, as though even saying the words aloud would be too dangerous. Nkemjika's chest tightened. "What's coming?" she asked softly. But Obinna didn't answer. He turned abruptly, striding toward the door. At the threshold, he paused, his voice clipped and final. "Stay away from me, Nkemjika. For your sake." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving her trembling in the empty office. The gallery lights below blurred into a swirl of colors as her mind spun. That night, back in her apartment, Nkemjika tossed restlessly on her bed. Sleep claimed her in fragments, dragging her into another vision. She found herself standing in the streets of Victoria Island, staring up at a skyscraper that gleamed like glass fire. Suddenly, the building shuddered. Glass cracked, steel bent, and the tower began to collapse. She screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the chaos. Through the falling rubble, she saw him. Obinna. Trapped inside the tower as it crumbled, his eyes meeting hers one last time before the vision shattered into darkness. Nkemjika bolted upright in her bed, drenched in sweat, her chest heaving. The painted man, the billionaire she had never known, was bound to her in ways she could no longer deny. And if her dream was true, his empire was standing on the edge of ruin. In the silence of her small room, she whispered the words that refused to leave her lips. "I think I just saw his end." Nkemjika's nights no longer belonged to her. They belonged to visions. Each time she closed her eyes, a new dream seized her, vivid and relentless. She would wake in the dim light of dawn, her heart racing, her hands trembling, and rush to her easel. Canvas after canvas filled the walls of her small studio, visions of places she had never been, faces she had never seen, yet somehow knew. One painting showed a sleek boardroom suspended in the clouds, walls of glass overlooking the ocean. Figures sat around a long table, their outlines sharp but their eyes shadowed. Another canvas revealed symbols she did not understand, coded strings of numbers, glowing like fire across dark screens. A third showed Obinna, standing alone in a vast corridor, while behind him shadows lengthened like predators. The more she painted, the more she feared. It was not just his face she was capturing anymore. It was his world unraveling, piece by piece. Adaiz grew restless. "This is not art anymore, Nkem," she said one morning, her voice trembling as she looked at the growing collection. "This is obsession. These things you see, they're not normal." But Nkemjika could not stop. Something beyond her will drove her hands. Her brushes moved as if they already knew the images hidden in her mind. And every time she finished a canvas, she felt the weight of destiny pressing heavier against her chest. It was on one of those mornings, while the city stirred awake outside, that the knock came. She froze. No one visited her at this hour. When she opened the door, Obinna Obidike stood there. The billionaire's presence filled her tiny studio instantly, his dark suit a sharp contrast against her cracked walls and paint-stained floors. He looked around slowly, his eyes narrowing at the flood of canvases leaning against every surface. For a moment, silence hung. Then he stepped forward, stopping before the painting of the futuristic boardroom. His jaw tightened. "This," he muttered under his breath, "is my office." Nkemjika's stomach turned. "I don't know how," she said softly. "I only painted what I dreamed." He moved to the next canvas, the coded symbols glowing like fire. His eyes darkened. "These are my company's private encryption signatures. Only my top engineers know them. How could you paint this?" Nkemjika's lips parted in shock. She hadn't even known what they meant. They were just shapes that had burned themselves into her mind at night. Obinna turned to her, his face a mask of control, but his eyes betrayed something raw. Fear. "I've always felt it," he admitted slowly. "For years. That someone was watching my destiny. That, no matter how far I ran, no matter how high I built, something unseen was following." He looked back at the canvases. "Now I see it was you." Nkemjika's hands trembled. "I don't want this," she whispered. "I didn't ask for it. I just paint." For the first time, the ironclad billionaire let the mask slip. His shoulders dropped, his face softened, and in that moment he looked less like a titan of industry and more like a man who carried too much. "You think fortune is freedom?" he asked, almost to himself. "It is not. Fortune is chains. I eat at tables where everyone smiles, but everyone plots. I stand in rooms filled with applause, yet I feel only silence. You've seen the solitude I live in." Something inside Nkemjika shifted. Her fear melted into something else. Understanding. He was not invincible. He was not untouchable. He was human. And she, somehow, had been given the keys to glimpse the truth of his world. He turned back to her, the steel in his voice returning. "If you step into my circle, there will be no turning back. You will lose the life you know. Every truth will cost you. Every secret will endanger you. Are you ready for that?" Nkemjika's throat tightened. She had no answer. Obinna's gaze lingered on her for a long, heavy moment. Then he exhaled sharply, as though releasing a thought he could not contain. He looked back at the canvases once more, and his eyes fell on the newest painting. It was Obinna himself, surrounded by a circle of trusted allies. Their faces were clear, their postures confident. But one face, one crucial face, was blurred, hidden in shadows. Obinna stepped closer, studying it with unease. "Why is this one unclear?" Nkemjika's voice was barely audible. "Because I think that's the one who betrays you." Silence slammed into the room. Obinna's jaw clenched, his breathing steady but sharp. The canvas seemed to pulse with its own warning, daring him to confront what it meant. Obinna tore his eyes from the blurred face and turned to Nkemjika, his voice low and grave. "If this is true, then the war for my empire has already begun." The world of Obinna Obidike was not one Nkemjika had ever imagined entering. Yet in the days that followed, he opened its doors to her, hesitant at first, then with a quiet urgency, as though something about her presence was inevitable. It began with a yacht, a sleek white vessel that cut through the waters off Banana Island like a blade, gleaming under the sun. Nkemjika had never stepped on such luxury before. The floors shone like polished marble, champagne sparkled in tall flutes, and waiters moved as if they floated. She stood at the deck, staring at the endless Atlantic, the Lagos skyline shimmering in the distance. Obinna appeared beside her, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in sharp, decisive tones. Tell Tokyo we'll sign the deal only if they agree to 20% equity. If not, they can walk away. He ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and glanced at her. For the first time, his expression softened into something almost playful. "Overwhelmed?" he asked. "Completely," she admitted, her voice shaky. "This feels like another planet." His eyes lingered on her. It is another planet. A world where people smile but hide knives. Where trust is a currency no one can afford. And yet, he paused, his gaze tightening. "You stand here as though you belong." She swallowed hard, unsure whether it was a compliment or a warning. From the yacht, it was Paris. An impromptu flight in his private jet. Glass walls and velvet seats, the hum of engines steady beneath their feet. She watched him on international calls, speaking French to one side, Mandarin to another, navigating millions with the ease of a chess player moving pawns. Yet between calls, he looked at her, quietly, searchingly, as if her presence grounded him. In Paris, they attended a fashion show. The lights dazzled, the models glided, cameras flashed. Nkemjika wore a gown Obinna had ordered for her, shimmering silver that hugged her frame like moonlight. She felt eyes on her, whispers following her every step. Who is she? Why is she with him? But she ignored them, because when Obinna looked at her, none of that mattered. Amidst the glamour, Nkemjika saw cracks in his armor. At dinners, surrounded by billionaires and politicians, he smiled but his eyes remained watchful. At night, while the world celebrated him, she caught glimpses of him staring into silence, haunted by something no one else could see. One evening, back in Lagos, Obinna invited her to a private dinner. The location was breathtaking, an exclusive restaurant built over the waters of the Atlantic, the city lights glittering in the distance. The table was set for two, candle flames swaying gently against the breeze. They dined slowly, but conversation carried more weight than the food. Nkemjika asked questions no one else dared. About his childhood, his loneliness, his fears. For the first time, Obinna answered. "My world is filled with applause," he said quietly, swirling wine in his glass. "But it is empty of sincerity. People love what I own, not who I am. But when I am with you—" He stopped, as though the words were dangerous. Nkemjika's breath caught. "When you're with me?" His eyes softened. "For the first time in years, I feel alive." The confession hung between them, fragile yet powerful. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. The warmth of his touch sent a tremor through her. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, the walls around him seemed to crumble. The night carried them further, to the terrace overlooking the Atlantic. The waves crashed against the shore, the city hummed in the distance. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear, and kissed her. It was not rushed, not careless. It was a kiss years in the making, built from solitude and longing, softened by the fragile promise of something real. Nkemjika's heart pounded, torn between fear and desire. She kissed him back, knowing that from this moment forward, nothing between them would be simple. Yet even as her lips touched his, the shadows lingered. Because at night, her dreams still came, and the next morning, her brush betrayed her again. On her canvas appeared a haunting vision. Obinna's empire stretched beneath her feet, skyscrapers rising, fortunes glowing like fire. But in the painting, she was not just watching, she was standing above it all, her hands outstretched. In one hand was light, in the other was darkness. Her face was calm, yet her posture declared the truth. She would either save him or destroy him. Nkemjika stared at the painting, trembling. Was this destiny showing her the truth of their love? That it could either be his salvation or his ruin? When Obinna arrived at her studio that evening and saw the painting, his eyes darkened, his voice low and grave. "So it is you. Who will decide my empire's fate?" The cracks in Obinna's empire began quietly, like hairline fractures in glass. At first, they were easy to ignore. Minor delays in contracts, whispers of hesitation among investors, delayed shipments. But within weeks, the fractures spread, widening until even the mighty Vascart trembled. One morning, as Obinna reviewed reports in his penthouse office overlooking Echo Atlantic, his aides shifted nervously. "The Singapore deal has collapsed," one announced, his voice shaky. "The investors are pulling out." Obinna's jaw tightened. "Why?" "They claim market uncertainty." "But, sir, the language in their letter suggests inside information. Someone tipped them off." He dismissed the aide and turned to the window, his reflection hard against the glass. Behind him, Nkemjika sat silently, her sketchbook open, her hands stained with charcoal. She had drawn the same image 3 times, shadows clustered around a table, voices whispering, hands shaking in secrecy. "You already knew, didn't you?" Obinna asked without turning. Nkemjika hesitated. "I dreamed it. Men in suits, voices thick with greed. But it wasn't in Singapore. It was closer. Too close." Obinna turned sharply, his eyes piercing. "Closer? You mean here?" She nodded. "It's not your foreign partners. Someone near you wants you to fall." The words stung him more than any business report. He had built his life on logic, strategy, numbers. Betrayal was a word he reserved for competitors, not those inside his circle. "You speak in dreams," he said coldly. "I deal in facts." Nkemjika rose, her voice trembling but firm. "And yet, my dreams keep proving true. How many more collapses must I paint before you believe?" The tension between them sharpened, a clash of worlds, her visions versus his logic, her instincts against his empire. Obinna clenched his fists, torn between disbelief and the gnawing suspicion that she was right. Meanwhile, the outside world smelled blood. The Nigerian media erupted in speculation. Headlines screamed, "Obidike Empire on the brink," and "Who is the mystery woman beside Obinna?" Photographs of Nkemjika leaving the yacht, stepping out of his jet, sitting beside him at the fashion show, were plastered everywhere. Social media buzzed with venom. "She's just a gold digger," one tweet read. "A witch, bewitching our billionaire," another scoffed. "She'll destroy him," whispered Lagos socialites at cocktail parties, their laughter sharp as glass. For the first time, Nkemjika felt the heat of a spotlight she never asked for. Strangers whispered her name, accusing her of things she didn't understand. Her paintings, once her sanctuary, became ammunition against her. "Obidike's downfall is her doing," one blog wrote, accompanied by stolen pictures of her canvases. "The witch who paints the future." Obinna tried to shield her. He tightened his security around her apartment, sent chauffeurs to fetch her, even attempted to buy silence from tabloids. But the more he protected her, the louder the rumors grew. At night, when the world finally grew quiet, he let down his guard. They would sit together, not as billionaire and artist, but as two weary souls trying to hold back the tide. She saw the restless tapping of his fingers, the sleepless nights he tried to mask with coffee, the way he stared too long at empty space, as though searching for answers. Nkemjika wanted to reach for him, to promise safety, but her dreams gave her no peace. They grew sharper, clearer, more relentless. One dream dragged her into a conference room filled with smoke and whispers. Men she recognized from news reports leaned close, shaking hands in exotic cities, London, Dubai, New York. And then, in the corner of the room, a shadow moved. She turned, and her heart froze. The figure stepped into the light. His face was clear. It was not a stranger. It was someone whose blood ran with Obinna's. Nkemjika jolted awake, drenched in sweat. She rushed to her easel and painted feverishly, her strokes wild with urgency. By dawn, the canvas revealed the truth she dreaded. Obinna standing tall, unaware, while behind him, a blood relative smiled in the company of his enemies. She dropped the brush, her chest heaving. The blurred face from her earlier painting was no longer blurred. The vision had chosen to reveal itself. And it was worse than she had feared. When Obinna arrived that morning, she could not speak at first. She only pointed to the painting, her eyes wet with fear. He looked, his breath still, his expression unreadable. His empire was not being attacked from without. It was being dismantled from within. Nkemjika whispered the truth with trembling lips. "It's your own blood." The name came from her lips like a curse. "It's your blood." Obinna froze, his eyes narrowing as he studied Nkemjika's trembling frame. She pointed again at the painting, her brushstrokes forming a familiar face, sharp jaw, magnetic smile, eyes that seemed to promise trust but hide venom. Chidubem, Obinna whispered, almost unwilling to say it aloud. His half-brother. In the days that followed, Lagos itself seemed to shift under Chidubem Obidike's growing presence. Where Obinna was elusive, guarded, and feared, Chidubem was the opposite, charming, approachable, adored. He appeared at charity galas, shaking hands with the press, posing for photographs with children, donating millions to hospitals and schools. Newspapers hailed him as the people's prince. Obidike blood runs deep, one magazine declared, with Chidubem's smiling face on the cover. The brother who balances power with heart. But behind the mask of generosity lay something darker, and Nkemjika's visions revealed it. She painted him standing before a crown of fire, his smile wide, his hand stretched toward Obinna's empire as though it already belonged to him. When she showed Obinna, his face hardened. "This is your fear speaking, not the truth." Nkemjika shook her head. "I see it. I see the hunger in him. He envies you." Obinna's voice grew cold. "He is my brother. Do you understand what that means? Blood does not betray blood." But even as he spoke, cracks began to appear in the empire that pointed back to Chidubem. Contracts once loyal to Obinna shifted effortlessly toward his half-brother's companies. Politicians who had stood by Vaskart now courted Chidubem with warm smiles and open hands. Media outlets began to compare them openly. Chidubem the visionary, Obinna the shadow of his former self. Nkemjika watched in horror as the tide shifted. "Can't you see?" she pleaded. "He's moving against you in plain sight. The world adores him because he hides behind his charm, but his smile hides knives." Obinna slammed his palm against the desk, his voice sharp. "Enough! I will not hear another word against my brother. Chidubem has always wanted to prove himself, yes, but he would never cross me." Nkemjika bit her lip, tears burning her eyes. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in the bond of family. But her dreams left her no room for hope. One night, she dreamed again. She saw Obinna's office at the top of Skylux Towers, the city lights glittering beneath. But Obinna was not there. Instead, Chidubem sat in the leather chair, his hands folded on the desk, his smile calm, assured. Around him, the room was filled with silent figures bowing their heads in allegiance. The empire was no longer Obinna's. It had a new master. Nkemjika awoke with a scream, clutching her chest as though her heart might tear itself free. She stumbled to her easel and painted the vision before it could slip away. By dawn, the canvas told the story. Chidubem in Obinna's chair, victorious, the world bowing at his feet. When Obinna came, that morning, she showed him the painting. His eyes lingered on the details, the chair, the skyline, the smirk on his brother's lips. For a long time, he said nothing. Finally, his voice was low, almost breaking. "Do you know what it means, Nkem? If this painting is true, it means I have been blind. It means my empire is already slipping through my fingers." Nkemjika touched his arm gently. "Then open your eyes before it's too late." But Obinna turned away, his shoulders rigid, his silence heavy with denial. And yet, in his heart, a seed of fear had been planted. That night, as Nkemjika lay awake, staring at the latest painting, the image of Chidubem's calm smile burned into her mind. She whispered to herself the truth Obinna refused to accept. "He will not stop until he sits in your chair." The whispers grew louder, slithering through the streets of Lagos, carried in salons, cafes, and elite gatherings. Nkemjika was no longer just the mysterious painter. She had become a scandal, a cautionary tale. The witch who foretells, they called her. Newspapers splashed headlines. "Is Obidike under a spell?" Talk shows debated her existence. Some said she was his secret weapon, others that she was the reason his empire faltered. Social media feasted on her image, dissecting her every move, every dress, every expression caught by the paparazzi. "Look at her," one blogger sneered. "She paints doom, and doom follows. She is his curse." The rumors dug into Nkemjika's skin like thorns. Each morning, she dreaded opening her door, afraid of what strangers might hurl at her. She had once painted for peace, for solace. Now her art was weaponized against her. Obinna did everything to shield her. He tightened his security, barred certain tabloids, and sent warnings to those who dared to defame her name. He held her hand in public, walking beside her without shame, as if to declare to the world that she belonged by his side. But behind closed doors, she saw the truth. His empire was unraveling faster than either of them could stop. Contracts continued to vanish. Investors leaned toward Chidubem's charm. Board members grew restless, their loyalty shifting like sand in the tide. The once unshakable Vascart now stood on fragile legs, and Obinna carried the weight of its collapse on his shoulders. One evening, as rain whispered against the windows of his penthouse, they sat together in silence. Obinna, usually guarded, allowed the past to bleed through. "When I was a boy," he said softly, staring at the skyline, "my father left. He built another life, another family. I was the son left in the shadows, the one who had to fight for recognition." Nkemjika listened, her heart aching. "My mother tried to protect me," he continued, his voice trembling, "but even she was taken from me too soon. All I had was myself. Betrayal was my inheritance, solitude my companion. That's why I built all this." He gestured at the glittering city beneath them. "So I would never be ignored again." Nkemjika reached for his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "You're not alone anymore." His eyes softened, the steel melting into something fragile. "No, not with you." In those quiet, intimate moments, their love deepened. They shared laughter when the world outside burned, found solace in each other's arms, whispered truths only the night could hold. Their bond became the one light in the darkness. But the danger around them did not relent. The media grew bolder, enemies grew sharper, and even Obinna's allies began to waver. Love gave them strength, yet it also made them vulnerable. For every step they took toward each other, the shadows crept closer. And then came the darkest painting yet. One night, Nkemjika woke trembling, her dream heavy as stone. She stumbled to her easel, brush in hand, painting feverishly until dawn broke. When she finally stepped back, her breath caught in her throat. The canvas showed Obinna, tall and proud, but walking into emptiness. Behind him, the empire crumbled, skyscrapers fading into mist. Ahead of him stretched only void, an endless nothing swallowing his path. His face was unreadable, caught between defiance and surrender. When Obinna arrived that morning, she hesitated to reveal it. But secrets were no longer an option between them. She pulled the cloth away, her eyes brimming with fear. He stared at the painting in silence, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. Minutes passed, each one heavier than the last. Finally, he exhaled, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe this is what I was born for," he murmured. Nkemjika's heart shattered at the resignation in his voice. She stepped forward, clutching his arm. "No, that's not what this means. You are more than your empire. You are more than this fate." But Obinna's eyes lingered on the painting, dark and distant, as though the void was already pulling him in. The silence stretched between them, and for the first time, Nkemjika feared that he had already accepted a destiny she was desperately fighting to change. The fall of an empire never begins with thunder. It begins with whispers. For Obinna, those whispers had now become deafening roars. The reports stacked on his desk were grim. Tech rivals in Asia had undercut Vascart's logistics systems. African investors were shifting their capital toward Chidubem's ventures, and even longtime partners were withdrawing quietly. The numbers that once soared now plummeted, graphs carving downward spirals across glowing screens. Obinna stood at the center of his boardroom, his reflection fractured in the glass table. His advisors spoke in cautious tones, but their eyes revealed what their words avoided. They no longer believed. In her studio, far from the skyscrapers of Eco-Atlantic, Nkemjika painted feverishly. Every canvas that emerged from her hands mirrored the empire's decline with uncanny precision. Crumbling towers, empty boardrooms, contracts torn like brittle paper. It was as though her brush knew the fate of Obinna's empire before the world did. When Obinna saw the paintings, his face darkened. "Are these visions?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "Or are you making them real?" Nkemjika's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Every time you paint it happens. You saw betrayal, and now it surrounds me. You saw emptiness, and now the empire crumbles. Tell me, Nkem, are you guiding destiny, or are you causing it?" The accusation sliced through her heart. "You think I want this? You think I would destroy you?" But doubt had already taken root in him. The weight of his empire's collapse pressed so heavily on his shoulders that even love could not lift it. Their relationship strained under the pressure. Conversations turned sharp, silences stretched longer, and trust, once fragile but strong, began to fracture. The city watched as the balance of power shifted. Chidubem's star rose higher with every headline. He launched sleek innovations, courted global investors, and charmed governments. The media hailed him as the new face of African innovation, while whispers branded Obinna as a relic of a fading era. The shift became undeniable one night at a glamorous gala hosted at an opulent Victoria Island ballroom. Chandeliers glittered, violins played, and the richest of Nigeria and beyond gathered to toast success. Obinna arrived with Nkemjika at his side, her presence sparking fresh gossip, but the air felt heavy with judgment. When Chidubem entered, the room erupted in applause. Cameras swarmed, investors rushed forward, and socialites fawned. His smile gleamed, his charm effortless. The gala became his coronation, while Obinna stood at the edges, shadows tightening around him. Nkemjika felt the sting of humiliation for him. She wanted to reach for his hand, to remind him of his worth, but his eyes were distant, locked on his brother with a mixture of fury and grief. Days later, the vision came again. Nkemjika's hands moved across the canvas, wild and unstoppable. When she finally stepped back, her heart froze. The painting showed a skyline consumed by fire, towers collapsing in flame, and at the center, a building with vast cart's insignia glowing faintly before it melted into darkness. She prayed it was only metaphor, only a warning. But 3 days later, reality struck. Obinna's flagship headquarters, the towering jewel of Skylux Towers, suffered a devastating blackout and systems crash. Power failed across multiple levels, servers fried, data vanished. For hours, chaos reigned, employees trapped in elevators, clients screaming over lost millions, investors watching in horror as markets reacted. The blackout was more than a technical failure. It was a symbolic collapse. Vascart, once unshakable, now looked fragile before the world. Obinna returned to his penthouse that night, his face pale with exhaustion. Nkemjika rushed to him, desperate to comfort, but he pushed past her. "Obinna," she pleaded, "you can rebuild. You've faced storms before." He turned sharply, his eyes hollow, his voice hoarse. "And each time you painted it, every fall, every collapse, every failure, you saw it first. Tell me, Nkem, are you my salvation or my ruin?" Her tears blurred her vision. "I never wanted this. I only painted what came to me." He stepped back, shaking his head slowly, as if a terrible truth had crystallized. "Maybe you were sent to end me." The words shattered her. She reached for him, but he pulled away, retreating into the silence of his private chamber, leaving her trembling in the glow of the city lights. Alone in the studio that night, Nkemjika stared at the cursed canvas of fire and whispered to herself, "If love cannot save him, then what is left?" The city awoke to a thunderclap of silence. Obinna Obidike had vanished. No meetings, no press, no appearances. His penthouse in Echo Atlantic stood empty, his staff dismissed, his offices locked. The man whose presence once dictated markets had disappeared without a trace. Investors panicked, journalists speculated, and the nation buzzed with questions. Had he fled? Was he ruined? Or worse? For Nkemjika, the disappearance was not merely news. It was devastation. She had seen him unravel piece by piece, had watched the empire slip like sand through his fingers, but never imagined he would abandon everything. Yet, deep inside, a whisper told her this was not an escape. It was a retreat. She refused to give up. Her dreams sharpened, transforming into maps of hidden trails. She saw flashes of places that did not appear in headlines: an exclusive club with velvet drapes and smoke-filled air, an abandoned mansion where chandeliers hung crooked in decay, a coastal villa where the waves crashed endlessly against forgotten walls. Each night, her visions pulled her further, urging her to follow. And she did. She walked through the corridors of Lagos high society, asking careful questions in hushed tones. She slipped into places where only the wealthy dared to go, her heart racing as strangers eyed her with suspicion. She wandered through empty estates on the edges of town, paintbrush in her bag, sketching what she saw to match what her dreams revealed. Each step led her closer. At last, on the outskirts of a hidden coastal resort, she found him. The villa stood silent against the roar of the Atlantic. Curtains drawn, gates rusted, gardens untended. Inside, Obinna sat in the half-light, his suit discarded, his once proud frame slouched as though carrying invisible chains. He looked nothing like the titan of Vaskart, nothing like the billionaire who once commanded nations with a single decision. He looked broken. For a long time, he did not notice her standing there. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, eyes hollow, lips unmoving. Finally he turned. When he saw her, his expression shifted, not surprise, not anger, but a quiet resignation, as though he had expected her to find him. "Why are you here?" His voice was hoarse, heavy with exhaustion. "Because you're not finished," Nkemjika said, her own voice trembling. He gave a dry, bitter laugh. "Not finished? My empire is ashes. My name, mockery. I built everything, so I would never disappear. And yet, here I am, hiding like a fugitive from my own shadow." Nkemjika stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "You're not hiding from your shadow. You're hiding from yourself, from the man you fear you've become." His eyes flashed with pain. "What else should I do? Stand on the ruins and pretend I am still a king? Watch my brother take what I built, piece by piece, while the world applauds him?" She shook her head fiercely. "You misunderstand. I didn't paint your end, Obinna. I painted your choice. The emptiness wasn't your ruin. It was your retreat. You chose to walk away before they could tear you apart." The words struck him like thunder. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. Silence filled the room, broken only by the relentless crashing of waves outside. Nkemjika knelt before him, her hands clutching his. "You are not the man they call ruined. You are the man I see in my visions, the one who still has a choice. You can be destroyed by fate, or you can rewrite it. Which will it be?" He raised his head slowly, his eyes haunted, raw, glistening with emotions he had hidden for years. His lips parted, but no words came at first. Finally, his voice broke the silence, low and uncertain, as though confessing to himself more than to her. "Then tell me." He held her gaze, the weight of his despair mingling with fragile hope. "If this is my choice, then what do you see next?" The question hung between them like a blade. Nkemjika's heart pounded, because though her visions had guided her this far, she did not yet know if the next canvas would reveal redemption or final destruction. At dawn, when the sea whispered like a confidant and the horizon wore a pale gold veil, Nkemjika primed a fresh canvas and refused the language of ruin. Her hands moved with a quiet certainty she had never known, guided not by visions of collapse, but by the tender ache of possibility. She mixed colors the way prayer mixes breath and hope: ultramarine for courage, warm umber for humility, a thin braid of alizarin for the pulse of life. This time, the first stroke was not a warning. It was a beginning. She painted Obinna not as a titan on a glass throne, not as a hunted monarch measuring enemies by the sparkle in their smiles, but as a man in linen and bare feet, standing on wet sand where the tide kisses the shoreline and retreats without greed. Around him, no boardroom, no cameras, no crown waiting to be stolen, only a shoreline that made room for his heartbeat, and a sky that refused to judge him for laying his burdens down. When she turned the canvas toward him, the villa was silent, except for the ocean. Obinna stared, and the mask he had practiced since boyhood, stoic, invulnerable, distant, crumbled like sugar under rain. The painting did not mock him with after or before. It offered instead. He reached out, almost childlike, and stopped his hand inches from the surface, as if touching the image might bruise it. "This is me," he whispered, "if I choose you over everything else." Nkemjika nodded, and the room filled with a soft, inevitable yes. They retreated without ceremony. No press statement, no farewell gala, no engineered rumor to distract the wolves. The seaside villa became their small republic of quiet freedoms. Sandals by the door, food that tasted of smoke and pepper, long afternoon naps where grief finally loosened its fists. Lights flickered at night, PHCN playing its familiar games, and they learned to laugh in the dim hush of battery lamps, as if darkness were a friend returning to say, "You survived me after all." Obinna rediscovered time, the priceless currency he had traded for applause. He rose early to run along the beach, his breath sinking with the tide, muscles remembering they served a body before they served an empire. He learned the stubborn patience of frying plantain without burning the edges, the ordinary holiness of washing dishes until the water ran clear. And in the evenings, under a raffia shade where the breeze was salted and kind, he read dog-eared novels out loud, stumbling on Igbo proverbs that made them smile into their cups. Nkemjika painted from love, not fate. Her new canvases held the intimacy of shared silence. A chipped teacup drenched in morning light, a threadbare throw on which they argued and forgave, a pair of shadows crossing the same threshold at dusk. She painted his laugh the way wind paints ripples on water. She painted the scar near his wrist as if it were a signature. Her brush no longer sprinted toward catastrophe. It lingered, attentive, careful, a witness to the ordinary miracles that empires can never afford. News still traveled, the way news always finds the people who have stopped asking for it. Chidubem's ascent dazzled for a season. He headlined conferences, premiered neon-bright ventures, charmed capitals with promises signed in presentations and scented rooms. But genius is not charisma, and stamina cannot be borrowed. Systems groaned without the architecture Obinna once tended in invisible hours. A small miscalculation became a corridor of larger ones. The algorithm that sang in rehearsal stuttered during the performance. Investors smiled and stepped back. Applause dimmed. Headlines shifted tone. They did not gloat. On market days, they drove to a nearby town where fish still wriggled in woven baskets and peppers bragged in scarlet. They ate boli by the roadside, brushed ash from their fingers, and argued kindly about who made the better stew. When gossip about Chidubem's troubles spilled from someone's radio, they turned the volume down and returned to the weather. Whether rain would snatch the laundry, whether the hibiscus would open before noon, whether the moon would dare a clear path through Harmattan haze. Sometimes the past arrived anyway, uninvited. Obinna would pause mid-sentence, eyes elsewhere, remembering the portrait of himself, walking into emptiness. Nkemjika would touch his shoulder, a lighthouse on skin. Not emptiness, she'd say. Space. On those nights, they made new rituals, writing their names with toes on wet sand, letting the waves erase them without fear, counting container ships until distance turned them into commas on the horizon, promising out loud, "We refuse the throne that demands our souls." Their love became a craft, not a collapse, stitched together by apologies made before pride could rehearse them, by laughter that arrived precisely when the world expected tears, by desire that felt less like lightning and more like a hearth where winter surrenders. They were still themselves, scarred, stubborn, sometimes afraid, but now their fears had chairs at the table and could not knock plates from their hands. The villa learned their names, the sea learned their story, even the wind learned the secret shape of their embrace. One evening, when the sky bruised purple and the first generator coughs rose from far compounds. Nkemjika primed another canvas and asked for nothing. What came was gentle and irrevocable. She painted a small pair of sandals beside their own, sunlit and slightly askew, as if a child had just been called to dinner and promised to return to the game. She painted a crescent of laughter, not seen but felt, and in the corner, a date without a year, Faith claiming a calendar it could not yet name. Obinna stood behind her, arms folding her into the space his body now understood as home. He did not ask when or how. He simply bowed his head, kissed the crown of hers, and let the future breathe. The last canvas did not predict. It blessed. Unborn yet inevitable, the small inheritance on paint and light announced a legacy measured not in valuations, but in a life both of them chose, again and again, when no one was watching. What do you think? Was Nkemjika's gift a blessing or a curse? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.